Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. American's Moments in History. And again, we're going to be focusing on U.S. history today. We are going to continue talking about the Jefferson era, and in particular, we're going to be talking about the end of Jefferson's presidency today. So this would be section 3 of chapter 9 for us, ladies and gentlemen, in my class. And then we're also going to start talking about the beginning of James Madison's presidency, as we kind of prepare for war in section 4 with the War of 1812. But the image that we're looking at today is really kind of a great way to kick us off, because this is American sailors, so that's members of the U.S. Navy, being impressed or forced into serving, in particular, this case, the British Navy. So we're going to get more into that here in just a little bit, but just kind of to get us prepped for where we're heading. All right, as far as our learning target goes for today, we are going to be able to, or I can identify the challenges to the nation's stability during the late 17 and early 1800s. And we are going to be talking about pirates today. So pirates certainly are a reality during this time period of a world history, but particularly for our focus on the U.S. perspective here. They made travel very dangerous, and they brought the U.S. into conflict with the northern African nation of Tripoli in the early 1800s. So what's going on in the rest of the world is going to have a really important role to play here. So one of the things that we need to kind of establish is the war that we've been talking about between France and Britain, well, that's still going on. And as a result, the U.S. has tried to stay neutral. They're really trying to keep that mentality that George Washington created and staying out of the affairs of European nations in particular. So American merchant ships actually take over a lot of the transport of goods, and they profited greatly from this experience. They were able to take up a little bit more because, remember, a lot of the French and British ships right now are being used to fight in the war between those two nations. And so the U.S. kind of stepped in and was able to take over some of the shipping that those nations left behind. Now, pirates from the Barbary Coast, which is, again, northern Africa, which we'll show you here on the map in just a second. But they're frequently intercepting ships, particularly those that are traveling in what is now the Mediterranean, or what is the Mediterranean Sea, and certainly in the Atlantic Ocean as well. And they are demanding what's called tribute, which is money paid for protection, and that is in exchange for safe passage to different ports throughout Europe. And so in 1804, Tripoli then is going to declare war on the U.S. because Jefferson's not having it. He's not going to pay these tributes anymore. And the U.S., being a young nation, they don't really have the money to keep paying these pirates over and over again. And so Tripoli is going to go to war. They're going to declare war on the United States. And this is where Jefferson kind of gets some of his big tests. So he expanded the U.S., but now he's got to kind of navigate his way in a war with Tripoli. So just to kind of get your bearings geographically, we can see here the Barbary Coast is kind of what we refer to as the northern part of Africa at this point. So you've got nations like Morocco and Algiers, and then Tunis, or what eventually is going to become Tunisia, and then, of course, Tripoli. And then we still have the Ottoman Empire, which, as we get through U.S. history, we will see the role the Ottomans play, for example, in World War I. So the United States, like we said, they're really going to try to maintain and retain neutral rights in the war between France and Britain. So essentially, they want to have the right to sail the seas, and they don't want to have to take sides. Well, that works if both France and Britain are going to agree to that idea that the U.S. can stay neutral but still sail and still gain economically. Well, you probably are going to guess here that's not going to happen. So the British were desperate in their need for soldiers, and so as they're fighting in this war with France, they need men. And so they boarded American ships and they forced members of their crew to serve in the British Navy because, again, they are so in need of sailors that they basically, it's not necessarily about what is being held on these ships, what's being transported, although certainly they would have taken that too, but they need the men. And so they're taking these American sailors and forcing them to serve as members of the British Navy. So essentially, impressment, our vocab word here, is forcing people into service, as in the Navy in this case. Well, a lot of this is going to come to a hit here in that the British are going to attack an American ship called the Chesapeake. And this is going to cause Americans to react very violently, very harshly, with a lot of anti-British feeling. Now, the British are already not very well liked in the United States because remember the abuses that led to the Revolutionary War and the British fighting that whole war. But in 1807, Congress is going to go so far as to pass the Embargo Act. And the Embargo Act is going to create this embargo against all foreign trade. And again, our vocab word here on this slide is embargo. That's an order prohibiting trade with another nation. This is going to prove to be a major thorn in Jefferson's side. In fact, this is the big event that tarnishes his reputation, but also his presidency, because it's going to prove to be very ineffective. In fact, it's going to hurt the U.S. more than it's going to hurt anybody else, because the U.S. as a young nation just can't produce enough of what it needs to meet those needs. And so this is really going to come to backfire. And early on in Madison's presidency, you're going to see the passing of the Non-Intercourse Act to try to just prohibit that trade only between Britain and France. Because essentially what Jefferson did is he was now punishing all other nations that traded with the United States for the actions of the British and the French. And again, it proved to be a major failure, and it's one of the things that really hurt Jefferson's presidency as he left. But thankfully, it wasn't enough to stop the man who Jefferson wanted to become president after him or succeed after him, which would be James Madison. He is going to get in. So you still have a Democratic Republican win the White House. Now, like we mentioned here at the top, we're heading towards war. We know we're getting towards the War of 1812. That's what Section 4 is, right? We're going to see the burning of the White House. But Congress is going to lift its trade restrictions later with France in 1810. And again, this is under the presidency of James Madison now. But American ships are still going to continue to be seized by both the French and the British. And so you're dealing with that international issue going on. But now you're going to have a domestic problem. You're going to have a problem within your own country because remember all that land that was acquired during the Louisiana Purchase? People were already living there. Native Americans had set up trade networks and these elaborate cultures, and they weren't going to give those up just because somebody else bought it from a country that, in their eyes, didn't own it to begin with. And so Native Americans are going to come together in a group that we call a Confederacy, groups coming together, in this case, for a common cause. And they're going to be led by a Shawnee chief by the name of Tecumseh. And he and his brother are going to lead this movement, and they're going to try to halt the movement of settlers into further and further into Native American territory. And this is going to become the Battle of Tippecanoe. And it's the Battle of Tippecanoe where a future president is going to gain a lot of his reputation. It's going to help him become president. That's going to be William Henry Harrison. We'll talk about him a little bit later in U.S. history. But the U.S. is going to be able to put down this revolt, and after the defeat at the Battle of Tippecanoe, Tecumseh is going to make an alliance with the British. And that is the roots and the sowing of the British into the War of 1812, a.k.a. the Revolutionary War Part 2, the British Revenge. So we're laying that foundation for where we're going to kind of wrap up this unit, which is with the War of 1812. Now, certainly within this movement in this international conflict with the French and the British, but also with the Native Americans within the United States' own borders, there's a group of young Republicans known as the Warhawks, and they are going to be led by two important figures in U.S. history, Henry Clay and John Calhoun. They wanted President Madison to take a more aggressive stand towards Britain. And the Warhawks and their nationalism, which is this intense loyalty to one's nation or a group and the promotion of interests above all others, they really appealed to this renewed sense of American patriotism, which is pride in your country. Now, nationalism and patriotism are two very different things. Patriotism is love for your country, but nationalism is that intense loyalty that you feel that promotes, an interest above all others and doesn't look at the whole thing. Nationalism, as we'll see throughout U.S. history, but also world history, is going to create conflicts like World War I. Patriotism, on the other hand, would be our Pledge of Allegiance. It would be other things that we do to show appreciation and a certain pride in our country. So certainly this increased nationalism is again going to, in the future in the U.S. and certainly in the world, lead to conflict like World War I. But as of for this time period that we're studying, it's going to be, again, a push towards war. We're going to see that with the War of 1812. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap up our discussion here on the Jefferson Era Section 3. Those of you who are in my class, make sure that you kind of check base with me back again. Hopefully you've been following along with the guided notes. If you haven't, please go back and fill in what you missed. For those of you who are just listening, really appreciate you coming along with us. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you learned a few things, and we'll see you next time.